Okay, welcome to tutorial number 2 for Pong. In the first tutorial, we learned how to get the paddles moving up and down, and then the ball to start and to actually bounce off the paddles. The problem that we have now is that our ball will not bounce off of the top or the bottom edge of the screen, so we're going to go through that and do that now. So by the end of this tutorial, well, if I was able to play the game a little bit better, we should have it looking like this, where it's going to bounce off the bottom edge. Or the top edge. All right. So there's a lot of math involved in this. It can get very confusing. I'm going to do my best to make it as simple as possible. We'll probably go back and forth between our example project here and the where we left off on the last tutorial. So for starters, I think I forgot to name the sprite ball. So we're actually going to call it ball. Alright, so we have our starting point here. We know we're setting our ball direction between our 60 and 120. Then we're pointing this thing direction in our ball direction, moving a certain amount of steps. And again, last time we put in if we're touching the left paddle or the right paddle. Alright, so we should have all that in. That should all make perfect sense to us. Now, before we start going into talking about how to get this ball to bounce off the top or bottom edge of the screen, it's really important that we understand how all these numbers work in Scratch. When we think about the directions, we have from 0 all the way to 180 are all positive directions, right? That's all going to be the ball moving right? Except for 0 and 180 will be straight up or straight down, right? Negative directions are when the ball is moving left. Okay, from, well, we can say from -1 all the way to -179. Alright, so understand that's the way the numbers work in Scratch, and that's the way our directional coordinates, or our vectors, we can say, are going to be denoted as numbers. Alright, so we can look at this diagram right here and understand wherever our ball is moving is going to be 60 is this direction, 120, -120, -160. And that's where we're having the ball start, so that's the numbers that we're probably going to stay within. Alright, so let's just start with the top edge of the screen. We're going to get our ball to bounce off of the top edge of the screen first. Alright, so if we're starting here, our ball can bounce off the top of the screen either with a positive direction or with a negative direction. So there's actually two scenarios in there, so we're going to have to put in two different if statements for our ball bouncing off the top of the screen. Alright, so we'll just start with the first one right here. We will say if our ball reaches the top of the screen, and for that we're going to use one of our operators and say if our Y position is greater than a certain number. So if our Y position is greater than, when we go all the way up to the top here, we can actually just kind of test this thing out if we want. We see where our ball ends up. Alright, so we're up there at 182. So we'll say if we're ever greater than 180, we want this thing to trigger some type of event to happen. Alright, so we will say if we're ever greater than 180, then we want our ball to bounce. Now, like we said before, we're going to need two if statements. So we want to know if this is going to have a negative direction, meaning it's moving left, or a positive direction, meaning it's moving right. So we'll have to say down here, we'll use our AND operator and say if our Y position is greater than 180 and our ball direction is positive, then let's calculate some numbers and change our ball direction. Alright, so we want our ball direction, I'll actually just go in here and grab if our ball direction is going to be positive. So we'll need another operator and say right here. Right, ball direction is greater than 0. Right, if we have a positive direction, that means we're moving. Right here, if it's 60, and we want to bounce off the top of the screen, and we want to move down, if we were going 60, we'd want that to translate to 120. Right, because we want it to be exact. Right, if we had a more steeper angle, if we were going up this way to hit the top of the screen, we want it to bounce off at the same angle, just the converse of it along the other vertical axis. Okay, so we have our first event triggered here. All right, we will do a second one, but we'll actually hunt for all of our commands in here and get all of our operators. Then we'll change it for what we see fit for our second scenario. So let's just stick with this first. Let's stick with this example. Let's say, right, we have our horizontal surface, which is the top of the screen. Right, we'll use that as an example right here. So this is negative 90 and 90. Let's just say our ball is traveling in a direction of 70. All right, if our ball is traveling in a direction of 70 and we have this thing hit the top of the screen, we want it to switch, then bounce off and move in a direction of whatever this is right here. All right, and if we think about what number we want that to be, we would want that to translate into 110. All right, so we want this thing to go from 70 to 110. All right, so we need to develop some type of formula for all these numbers in here. All right, whatever number this is, whatever positive direction, when it hits the top of the screen, it's going to be somewhere in this quadrant. And when it reaches that position above 180, we want it to translate to some type of number down here. All right, and the way we get that number, I'm actually going to flip back and forth between our example project, is we're going to set our ball direction to 90 plus the difference between 90 minus our ball direction. So 90 minus our ball direction is going to be this number right here. In this case, it's 20, right? 90 is this surface right here, and 70 is right here. So we want to go, instead of 20 degrees up, we want this to be 20 degrees down. All right, so we'll go ahead and get that. We're going to say, set our ball direction to, and this is where we're going to need some operators. We're going to want to have 90 plus 90 minus our ball direction minus 90. Make sure I have that right. 90 minus our ball direction. I might have said that backwards a second ago. I apologize. Right, again, 90 minus our ball direction is this angle right here, and we want to find out what that value is and add it to here. That way it'll work for all these different values, not just our example of 70 and 110. It'll work for everything on the inside here. Okay, moving forward, we want to test this thing out. In order to test this thing out, let's send our ball up this way so our paddle is going to hit it and bounce it off the top of our screen. So we'll just say in the beginning, instead of doing 60 and 120, we can keep that there for the end, but we'll just add our own in here and make it this value right here. So between negative 90 and negative 60. And that may hit. Perfect, right? So we're bouncing off the way we want it to go. Perfect, right? So we're bouncing off the top of the screen. That looks awesome. All right, so now let's code in our second scenario for if we hit the top of the screen but go in the other direction. So if our ball direction is going to be negative, if it's going to be moving to the left. So we'll just duplicate this whole set of commands. We'll change our ball direction to be less than 0. And we're going to have to change our 90s to negative 90s because we're over on the negative side of the screen. Alright, now just to test this, we're going to do our beginning scenario. We're going to say we want to be somewhere between 60 and 90. are bouncing off the top of the screen exactly as we intended. Alright, now the last part of this becomes very, very easy when we have to bounce off the bottom of the screen. We can actually take all this math that we've done already and we can duplicate it. Alright, so we know we have one for a positive direction, we have one for a negative direction. All of this stuff in here we can keep the same with the exception of our y position. We want to say when our y position is less than negative 180 on the bottom of the screen, then do all the stuff that we just talked about before, right? We still have, if we're going in a positive direction, if we're going in a negative direction, we can keep all of that and make it, and just use it the same way we did up top. So we'll say negative 180, negative 180, and everything should be good to go. Just to test it, let's send it down to the bottom of the screen here. We'll start with this side over here. So we'll say we'll send it between 90 and 120. to 90. Perfect, right? We're bouncing off the bottom there. All right, I'll let you guys test the other one on your own. All right, we just have to send it in the different direction, or you can even just play the game and see how everything moves. All right, the very last thing I do want to talk about on here, just to sneak in, it's way different than the topic that we've been talking about so far, but sometimes you can get stuck in certain angles, like if our ball directions starts at 90, it's just going to go back and forth between our two paddles right here. Or if this thing starts at going 45, you're just going to get stuck and keep playing the same angles over and over. So I think it's a good idea to put in some type of randomization. I like to say whenever it touches the left or the right paddle, I just want to change our ball direction by just a small amount. So we can actually go in here and just say change it by either adding 3 or taking away 3 or anything right in there. It may not even change it at all, right? Pick some number random between 3 and negative 3. It's not really enough to notice when you're playing the game, but it's enough just to make it so you're not getting stuck in some type of in some type of scenario where you're just playing the same angles over and over and over. All right. So that brings up to the end of this tutorial. The next one we will look into increasing the speed, increasing the difficulty, and also giving point values.